a great pleasure and honor to have with us Miss Rose McGrath. She's a Fulbright scholar. She came in Greece for the first time in 2006 in Thessaloniki and worked with Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. She stayed here for a month. And this is the place where she got inspired to write her play Three Graces, which is a Taverna opera, and it was inspired by Nikos Kazantzakis. Rose McGrath established a book called What Frogs in Other Plays, which is a collection of plays, and this is also inspired by Greek plays. So, Ruth, nice to have you here.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, that's great. So, my first kind of question is, in what ways does your mixture of music and poetry succeed in transgressing confines and restrictions imposed by society's judgments and our mindedness?
Yeah, I think that I am constantly transgressing boundaries between art forms. So my very work itself is in the transitional spaces between theater, music, art, and opera. And so I write in between things. I write also in between singing and speaking. A lot of my songs are written in that transitional space. So I believe that art, of course, is a liberating force, and that it might not even be in the moment that the artistic work is taking place that liberation happens. It could be in a delay. It might be years later that this liberation can take place, or it can take place also in the moment. But I feel that the power of making this kind of work is, I often say the power of playwriting is more faithful than any lover, more euphoric than any drug, it lasts longer than your lifespan, and it is more powerful than money. So this kind of art is of the heart and the soul, and I think that you have to first liberate yourself in order to make the kind of work that is open to all genres and open to these kind of transitional spaces that can be in the soul, so that you open your mind to it. And it can be very painful to do that, because I think cultural forces and capitalist forces are trying to push you into branding yourself, narrowing yourself, making yourself claustrophobic as an artist. And I try to break out of those constrictions and inspire other artists as well to do that, to break out of those claustrophobic places.
And that, I think, brings us to my next question, which is whether traveling and performing abroad is a way of exceeding your own geographical or cultural boundaries.
Yes, I absolutely believe so. I've done a lot of cultural exchanges or artistic exchanges. I've traveled all over the world with my work, and find that kind of exchange of ideas and practices is very beneficial for both sides, all sides actually, because you have to shake out of your own habits, and when you travel and you're in a new place, you cannot possibly be as habitual as you have been at home. You can't stick to the same patterns of behavior that you had at home. So you are disoriented in your behavior, which I think can be very useful for an artist, and can also be a way of re-identifying yourself. I actually think a lot about Zizek's way of marking the self, and he talks about the self as having a split, the internal self and then the exterior self. And I think in traveling, you can mark that interior self with alliances with other cultures and other practices that maybe you're not born natively into, but you can mark yourself with these things. And my music has been marked by all the places that I've been, and my writing is constantly being marked, and you see these marks in my work all the way through, in the grain of the voice, in the grain of the poetry. So I'm just coming now from a couple artist residencies where I was writing. I was in France in September, and in October I was in Serbia, and then recently in Istanbul. So all these places that I went, even in the past couple months, are inspiring me and disorienting me, which I think is very productive. So I feel that it's an education in and of itself to travel in a way that is open. I mean, you can always travel as a tourist and as an imperialist, kind of collecting things and buying souvenirs. Not that kind of traveling. It's a traveling that's more, like I was speaking in our class, more of a pilgrimage, so that so you're looking for enlightenment rather than to possess and own something.
Yeah. And since we talk about traveling, you get inspired by gypsy music, which is associated with the elements of freedom and independence that exist in the open space, as in the countryside. Do you think that you could get inspired by claustrophobic, narrow urban space, and how could this be achieved?
Yes, I think that when I was moving to New York City for the very first time, I was coming from very small villages and small cities, and moving to New York City as a kind of Midwesterner from pastoral places, I was shocked by the city, and I think that you can see it most in two pieces that I wrote when I moved there. One is called Wallpaper Song, and I call it an electric and hysteric operetta, and it was inspired by a claustrophobic building that my mother lived in. She lived in a studio apartment, all one room, very tiny space, and it was in a skyscraper building on 42nd Street, right in the heart of the urban claustrophobic space. And the piece that I wrote as an electric and hysteric operetta is built in a kind of music of hysteria. So I think that when I first encountered the city, I encountered it in a kind of hysteria because it caused a palpitation in my soul of just sort of like acceleration, and I didn't know quite how to catch up with this pace of the city. So I wrote a lot about it, and after that came the Electrofuge, and the Electrofuge is also rooted in a kind of punk operetta music that has these rants of ecstatic kind of energy, and that's what I was cueing into as an artist. I wasn't aware of it at the time, but looking back, I can see that this city was having this effect on me, and I think of it as a kind of cascading emotion, a cascading hysteria, euphoria, ecstasy of accelerated pace. So it definitely affected me. But the gypsy, the muse of the Roma gypsy has been with me for a very long time. I think the first time I encountered the Roma gypsy was in 1999 when I went to visit my mother. She was a peacekeeper in Sarajevo, and so I saw Sarajevo and heard the music that I didn't understand at the time was gypsy music, but I really feel that it called to me and has brought me back many times to the Balkans. And I don't completely understand this calling, but it's something that is an instinct, and I have to follow it because I can't not follow that. So it's been very important to my work and my music.
Your inspiration.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's really important to get inspiration by this very intense sense of freedom that's really there. And speaking of feelings, in your art you try to create uncanny feelings. The Gothic, as we all know, is associated with the uncanny, the familiarity of the unfamiliar, as well as the close proximity of danger. In the Gothic, everything starts from the built space. In what ways contemporary urban space, with its buildings capable of functioning as a source of the uncanny, how do you visualize it inspiring your art?
Yeah, I think that the uncanny and the Gothic sense of the unfamiliar has been very inspiring to two pieces that I've written in particular. One is called Judges 19, and it's actually not an urban space. It's a coal mine that inspired that piece. My grandfather and great-grandfather were both coal miners and had black lung disease. So this piece is written from the idea that the songs are coming out of these black exhalations of lungs that are polluted with the coal dust and the coal mines that are constricted but underground. And the city has these kind of spaces as well, the subways in New York, the tunnels underneath the city that I know we just went into the caverns underneath Istanbul and how they had the reservoir of water down there. And so there are these spaces in the city, but the space that really inspired me and made a very Gothic kind of impression in this work was the coal mine, and that piece is I think of it as a biblical coal mine, so the colors are very dark and the language is very dark, and the characters are very Gothic in that sense of you sort of know them. They are, if you know the Old Testament, there's a chapter that I took one of the characters from. She's a concubine, and there are things about her that are familiar. In some ways she's my Aunt Pearl, but in other ways she's not my Aunt Pearl at all. She's all of us. She's me. She's women. She's biblical from Judges. And in that sense of an archetype, she's familiar and uncanny at the same time. And the other piece I think that is most Gothic about my work is Night Vision. It's a vampire opera, and the character that is at the center is 2,000 years old, and she's singing with two hearts in her throat. She consumes these hearts from boys all through the 2,000 years, and takes their darkness and transfuses her darkness with it. So it's a very Gothic piece in the sense that it's a vampire, and it uses the folklore of the vampire and the mythic quality of the vampire, but it's a metaphor for capitalism sucking the third world dry, and the character is half Iraqi and half Roman. So, and I wrote this before before 9/11, so it was strange that 9/11 happened after that. And the other thing that is interesting about that piece is that there's a Bedouin singer that inspired the music of that piece. And that's also a transitional character of music that is not gypsy music, but it's Iraqi Bedouin music. And when I think about it, that happened even before I went to Bosnia in 1999, that I met this Bedouin singer. So it's something about this transitional, archetype that continually calls to me. And I think it's because I've moved so many times in my life. I've moved every 4 years up until I moved to Chicago. I'm finally there more than 5 years. So I'm constantly transitioning cities and places.
So, what about the feelings and experiences? You're wandering around the world and residing in an urban space trigger. And of course, how challenging it is for you in your arts, the feeling of confinement and seclusion, but life in big cities often entails. And how does this supplement or contradict your sense of freedom?
I think that there was a time when I was in graduate school that I studied masculinity. And one of the things that I found out about masculinity, because I wanted to write better male characters, I was writing a lot of female characters. One of the major traits of masculinity is mobility. And I found that very interesting because as a woman, historically, women have been more immobile, and we stay at home, we are in a domestic space, we don't travel. And when I thought about masculinity in this way, I thought, I want to be mobile because then I will have a sense of freedom and control over where I am and the spaces that I inhabit. And so I started to want to travel and long to travel. So I think that in a way that mobility is important for anyone, male or female, to access in themselves, because then you have the opportunity to choose where you want to live and where you want to be, and then you have the freedom over those choices that come from being mobile.
And then again, in what ways are your sounds from your music capable of reviving all stories in urban spaces without the use of words?
This is something that is a new idea for me, to think more about the visual aspect of my work. I've thought a lot about the sonic elements of the voice, and I've done these 2 drawings that I talk about of trying to architecturally describe the voice and the possibilities of vocal art. But now in my work, this is a very new facet that I'm exploring now, and that is the visual impact of language. And I think it's important to be able to make work that translates sonically, and I've worked a lot on that in terms of writing with music, so that if it's even heard by a different language, people speaking a different language, they can get something emotional out of it. But now I'm really wanting my work to go to a new level with the visual impact of it, and that's why I'm interested in working with painters and with visual artists to really think about the design of the set, and to work earlier with costume designers and set designers, so that I can also integrate that visual impact more early in the process, because I've been used to in the past 10, 15 years working early on with composers, and that's been a long exploration. Now I want to work early with designers, and so my dream is to bring that in earlier and than to constantly be thinking about the visual impact. So it's new, and I'm glad you're bringing this question.
Yeah, and my next question is, since your art places emphasis on music, drama, and language, embracing dance as many manifestations of art as possible, in what ways does it heal the sense of fragmentation that many people experience in urban spaces? And is a holistic view of art contributing more to the healing process?
Yes, I used to not think so, but I have done a lot of work with this group, Theater Without Borders, and I've worked with a woman, Dr. Cynthia Cohen, and she has a wonderful article that has inspired me a lot in this very question of, can theater be used to work towards coexistence or peacemaking, peace building between people that are in conflict, perhaps even in violent conflict, ethnic conflict. And I believe that there is a power in live theater and especially collaboration, because there are multiple points of view in plays. And when you're writing a play, you're writing many different characters. You're not just writing like a piece of fiction or poetry from a single point of view. You're writing from all different characters' points of view. And this is very important towards coming into a coexistence between different viewpoints, because if you have one person believing one thing, maybe coming from one cultural background, having a dialogue with somebody from another background disagreeing or whatever, you can then watch them trade points of view as they speak. And as a writer, you have to write from all these multiple points of view. And that multiplicity is part of building reconciliation and being able to take on maybe a point of view that you don't like or you don't agree with, and then they take on your point of view and you exchange these dialogues with different points of view. So that is very important, and also the multiplicity of narratives. A lot of my work has more than one story being told, and that is very important as well, that there not be just one story in a linear sense of like one story and this is the truth. No, there's many stories, and the kind of work that I make is open to many different interpretations, and I think that is also important, that the spectator create and finish their own version of my story. So I'm not imposing or dictating what the story is. I'm leaving it open for the audience to shape their own story from it. So all those things actually are part of building peace and coming to some sort of coexistence. And that's very important to me now in my work.
In one of your interviews, you express your desire to engage yourself with theater as inspired by painting. What does that connect these two forms of expression? How does this medium affect the way that your stories are narrated?
That's also new exploration as part of this visual language that started with, long ago I was thinking I would be a visual artist when I was young, and as we were talking about earlier, I put that aside and explored more music and theater. But being at the Art Institute of Chicago now since 2007, I'm around a lot of painters and visual artists, people drawing, sculptors, photographers, and it's inspiring me to think about painting, and I'm drawn to painting because I think of it as an emotional gesture of the brush, and the kind of painting that I'm really attracted to is the kind where you can see the brush stroke and you can see the imprint of the brush, and I like that that there's something human about that, and you see the effect of the hand, and I think writing is like that too. It comes from my hand. I handwrite before I type, and I want to write this kind of language that you can see the brush stroke of the humanity and the handmadeness of it. And also, I've explored a little bit when I'm singing. I painted with local beer in Romania and England as I was touring. And it was inspiring to use it as a gesture of the song. And then this year I was working with a theater company in Chicago, and we used red, blue, and yellow paint as a part of a soup riot in a piece that we made. And it's an Ionesco-inspired tramp that turns into a fly. And so we took paint and we just, out of the anger of the performers, this stage became almost like a Jackson Pollock painting. It was streaked with anger and red and blue and yellow all over the set, and I was very inspired by that, and by seeing the actors clean away the paint at the end and then wash away the paint from the set, so that by the end, after 20 minutes of the ending, you have a complete white set again. And that's in my mind now, and I want to work again with painting and different forms. So I don't know what it will turn out to be, but this is very exciting for me to explore.
Also, in the same interview, you expressed your great discontent when your creative work is restrained by practical issues, and therefore you have to modify it. Let's say that one's asked you to change an urban space, again under restraint, due to similar issues. What changes would you make, and what aspects of urban life would you prioritize?
In America, we have a problem with not having enough walkway space, or not having places for people to walk. And this is contributing to an obesity problem, and an environmental concern because everybody drives everywhere, and then the cars are polluting the environment. Also, I think it's a problem of a psychological problem, because people then don't have the meditation that they could have of walking. Remember in our class the other day, was it you that was walking to school? Yeah. And somebody was walking to school and loved it, and somebody was taking a bus and hated it. And I think if you have the freedom to walk, not only are you getting good exercise and not polluting the environment with carbon dioxide and the exhaust of the car, but you are also meditating and thinking and away from the computer, and your mind is free, and you can control your path. So we need to be able to walk, and in most of our cities you can walk, but a lot of our suburban areas are not building sidewalks anymore. So I would change to have walkways everywhere, and to really design neighborhoods so that there's places to walk, not just for exercise, but to run errands and to go to where people are going. And also bike paths, because I'm always riding my bike in Chicago, and there are more and more bike paths, but I would make everything's bikeable. And also, I love this architectural design of the Riyadh. I don't know if you know this kind of building, but it's I saw it in Morocco, and I think it's other places as well, where there's in the city, they have maybe 3 or 4 floors, and inside is an interior courtyard. And I love this design because you get some of the natural light and the environment coming inside the building, and you can you have privacy and quiet in the city. You go inside the Riyadh, and it's completely quiet and private, but it's also in the city. So I would design more American spaces to be built like that, because I think we could benefit from having bits of the environment come inside our buildings in the city. And then lastly, I would put gardens on all the roofs and have green roofs. Yes.
Also, in one of your interviews, you again mentioned that what we fear most is that reality is in a way formless. Could you perhaps elaborate on the use of formless here? And are there particular forms that shape reality? And how is this done?
I think reality is both formed and formless. And what I think reality programs pretend is that there's one kind of script in American reality programs, and I think the reality programs are coming to other places now too. But the narrative of that, the form of that, which is invisible to most people, is that you have to compete with your friends, family, and everyone around you in order to win and to succeed and to get what everybody wants. That's a capitalist form. It's a capitalist ideology, and I don't like it. It's a corporate mindset. I don't think reality needs to be that way. Of course it can be that way if you are living under that kind of ideological control, but I think perhaps everyone can win somehow in the end without eliminating everybody else around them. And maybe there's a way that the social good is more powerful than the individual good. And maybe that's a socialist concept. I don't think so. I think it's a human concept, and even socialism and communism have had problems when they try to enact that in a forced way. But I think when reality is too formed, it becomes fascist and like a dictatorship. But when it's completely formless, it's madness. So I think reality in a healthy way is a balance between forms and formlessness, because they're both present at all times. And I think that our art has to reflect that. I mean, why are we writing? Why aren't we writing with more formlessness? Because to me, that's realistic. That's what I see in the world. So, in a way, I am being realistic in my work to include formlessness. But a lot of people have disenfranchised it for so long that they think that it's they're only focusing on that kind of formlessness in my work or in other people that are making this kind of work.
And Café Antarctica and Central Music, as many of your plays, namely Electrofugues, are widely influenced by the Greek blues and the Roman gypsy music. What is that you find particularly interesting in this kind of music? And how does your music connect to migration or ethnic communities?
This is the one that I prepared. In answer to to this question, I would like to talk about two drawings that I did, and one is called Back of the Dollar Latin, and I can give you a copy of both of them. I drew it in 1997 when I first moved to Austin, Texas. I was working with a lot of punk bands, and that's when I was writing those hysteric operettas. I drew what I thought language could look like, and there were 3 dimensions of it, and in the foreground was something that I called face value, and to me that's where I would put the gypsy, because most gypsies in the world are in dire straits. They are being sent back to their homes. They're usually poor. They're having to live from begging and from playing on the street for just coins. And so there's something that is in an emergency about their situation, and to me that is, I understand that because I've been in a place where I was in dire straits myself, and I think most people can understand that at some point in your life when you were in that place of being very close to the camera because you need something, you need a coin, you need help. And so I feel that sometimes you have that in the voice, and for me that was a kind of cry pitch, and for years I was playing around with this idea of the cry in the voice, the suffering of a character, and the suffering of the gypsy calls to me in a cry in that way. Then recently in 2009 for the drama review, I had to write a manifesto, and for that I created a frame out of a little scarf of sequins. You saw it last night. I had it on my mic stand, and I try to bring that piece with me when I perform. I paid $1 for it on the street. I bought it from a gypsy in Belgrade, Serbia. So it's worth $1, but it's handmade, and to me it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. It catches the light. It looks like a peacock, but it also looks like a kind of decoration. It can be worn in many different ways. I've worn it many ways, and to me that inspires me in terms of what the voice can be. And I think now of the voice as a kind of ornament, and I'm wanting to push the ornaments of the voice, and I'm inspired by this word that is called alamkara. It's a word I found when I was traveling in Calcutta, India, and it means enough making, or that unadorned is not enough. And so I've been taking that into my idea of language and my idea of the voice, that I want to adorn the voice. And actually in Hindu, the way I understand this word is that any margin of a page, or the border of a dress, or the voice needs to be adorned. It needs a decoration in order for it to be enough. And I think in realism, there's this stripping away, pretending that there's no adornment, that there's no artifice. And I want to show the artifice. I want to show the adornment. And to me, that is what the gypsy tells me, is that the gypsy doesn't want to see their daily life. The daily life is very hard, and there's the drudgery of living on the streets and begging, and not all gypsies have to do this, by the way. That's a stereotype. But when they perform, they get dressed up, they change, they put on this kind of fanciness, and to me language needs that kind of escape from reality, and that's political to me, that I don't want to show the reality of life because I want to escape the reality of life. And I think that people who are caught in this trap of realism. And American theater is just completely trapped by realism. They're content with their lives as they are, and they're wanting to see themselves everywhere. They're worshiping themselves, and I don't want to worship myself. I want to transform. I want to honor and be enlightened by others, and I want to escape the drudgery that I see in reality. So that's why the Gypsy inspires me, and that's why I drew in when I made this drawing. It was only a frame. It wasn't any language at all. It was made out of my sequin scarf, and I think it's a signal for me to become more visual in my work and to continue to have the courage to adorn language and to escape the horrors of reality. I'll read this. I'm inspired by how the trills of Romani music use all 5 fingers on the accordion, working as hard as a hand can work, to celebrate the facets of tone between frets of melody. I love how the microtonal lyrics of Greek blues seem to split open a cubist multiplicity in the everyday, in the self, the other, and the real, slipping away very near to heaven for a moment of sudden splendor in the fracture of ornaments.
Thank you very, very much for this wonderful interview. Wishing you all the best.
Thank you.
Be always inspired and creative.
Thank you.
And sharing your wonderful art with people.
Thank you very much. I wish that for you too.